want to thank your organization, all of you, so much for this wonderful honor. And when I start thinking about what I want to say, I feel like the mosquito that flew over the nudist colony. You know, the opportunities are so vast, I hardly know where to begin. But anyway, there's a couple of things that pop into my mind every time I address a group that's trying to figure out how to do things right. And one is that I investigated at the complaint of my customer a dead bee claim. A man had a bunch of dead bees, and we had sprayed some rights of way near his property, and so naturally we got the blame. So I told him that we had applied a herbicide, not an insecticide. He said, "Boy, spray, don't tell me." That's the mentality of the 50s and 60s, I want you to know. You know, spray is spray. Like the man over in East Texas, or in Arkansas. Anyway, I had sprayed some herbicide and trimming some trees on the right of way for power line maintenance, and I got a call from the customer. I had to go see this man, and he was irate about me spraying this nasty stuff that close to his house. And I said, "Well, sir, I mean, you know, we were just spraying. That's oak trees out there. Boy, don't tell me if it'll kill an oak tree, it'll kill a man, you know." That's the kind of thing we faced in those days, and lots of it. But I would like to, I could just go on those stories, but I'd like to just tell you a little bit of stuff that I did. I spoke to the Southern Weed Science Society in Texas way back in 1991. I think we were in San Antonio, but anyway, this is sort of a little abstract what I did then, and it talks about ground application of industrial herbicides the early years, 1955 to 1990. Things were very different then, and only a handful of herbicides were available. Cumbersome equipment and crude methods of application was the beginning of a new but promising industry. With little or no regulations, applicators were free to use whatever product for whatever use they chose at any rate that felt good. And that's where I started. Fortunately, the attitude of the public was less hostile, and litigation was not as prominent as it is today, and we felt our way through the early years, making many mistakes, but learning all the time. As the 60s and 70s came on, we saw a lot of positive developments and some negative ones as well. Certification came about with the advent of FIFRA. Labeling restrictions began to take effect. Insurance costs began to mount as litigation was increasingly more prevalent. New products were popping up every year. The use of fiberglass tanks instead of steel was seen as a new innovation. Plastic hoses came along as well. Calibration became more important and simplified. More and more acres were being treated, more and more applicators were coming on the scene. As we moved on into the 80s, we became more sophisticated with lower volume, ultra low volumes, and many devices and products were developed for drift control. Insurance problems were even greater and costlier, forcing us to sell our image as good guys instead of poisoners and pillagers. So we learned a lot about how to address the public. We developed new containers and systems to return them to central points. We experienced an enlightened customer, which has been a real plus. Then what about the 90s and the future? It seems tougher at every turn. But I believe that the facts will show that most applicators, certainly all the suppliers, are better qualified in every way to do a good job and to become even better at what they do. Everything has changed during these 35 years except the principles of a good applicator. The desire to do a good job and the determination to do just that precisely and in harmony with the environment. And that is my challenge to the applicators of tomorrow. I'll just turn your mind back a few years and let you know, if I can get my hand to be still here. Turn your mind back a few years and what you needed to become an applicator, a commercial applicator, was buy the equipment. That's it. Do whatever you want to do, you know, after that. That was it. There's only a handful of products to choose from, 2,4,5-T, 2,4-D. Ammonium sulfamate was used for brush control. Monuron, sodium chlorate, metaborates, TCA, and a few others were available for grass and weed control. How about 2,4-D formulated as a powder, as a dust? Any of you ever seen that? Kind of dangerous. Well, anyway, high volatile esters of 2,4,5-T were in common use, and very little surfactant was even available, much less in use. High volume, 200 to 300 gallons per acre was the order of the day. Can you imagine that? And even for bare ground treatment. Cumbersome equipment, such as four-wheel drive, army trucks, chain-driven hydraulic pumps, large diameter, heavy-duty rubber hoses, and lots of manpower was the norm of the day. But anyway, you can, some of you were around a little bit as youngsters during those days. Calibration was sporadic and crude, since most applications were spray-to-wet situations. There was no certification, practically no regulation, and believe it or not, very little litigation. You must remember that there was not a mobile home and a garden behind every tree in those days. People were not as court conscious as now. Suits were not rarely filed except in the case of gross negligence, which would probably be described as gross ignorance. But anyway, it just goes on, and I've got a lot of stuff here, and I'm not going to read it all, but we just put on any rate that felt good with any product that sounded good or looked good or that we thought was good, and, you know, we got in lots of trouble. But fortunately, for a lot of us, we didn't get in too deep because people didn't know what to do about it. Anyway, I go on here in my report back in Texas, way back there, to tell about what some of the products cost, and I won't take your time now, but some of the charges for our services and whatnot, but I'll try to get on just a little bit further. There were relatively few chemical company reps available to tell a relatively new story to a very big new market. One of the saving graces was the fact that most of the early day manufacturers were very straight and honest about their products, and although little was known about their practical use, I know that in my case I had been working in the industry several years before coming to the realization that commercial applicators had a responsibility to help in practical research and development. Rates and application techniques were largely developed on the job. Naturally, labeling was not very restrictive in those days. Well, let me see what else. As the 60s and 70s came on, we saw a lot of positive developments and some negative ones as well. Certification came about with the advent of FIFRA, agricultural chemicals, which uses mushrooms giving rise to new research and new ideas for industrial use. I might have read this to you earlier. Yeah, I did. And so, I'll tell you about two or three other little things that happened to us way back when. And one was that this fellow had a contract to spray a major drainage canal the Mason over around Delhi. If any of you happen to be familiar with that, I'm sure some of you are. And he had a willow control or bank brush control spraying contract, and I knew this old man personally. In fact, he worked with me to get what little experience he had, and he decided that he had ruined a shirt one time with orange soda pop, so he sprayed several acres of willow trees with orange soda pop. Now, if you think that's not true, you just go on. I probably couldn't prove it, but I saw it, and it didn't work. It worked for about, we'll say about 2 or 3 days, and then it was over, you know. But anyway, then let me see if I can find another one of those YouTube ones. Oh yeah, I remember. Well, that same guy sprayed those same willows with kerosene when the pop didn't work. Well, the kerosene didn't last long either, you know. So, but that's the kind of thing that was fairly common in my early days. But anyway, I was picked by, as Rick has mentioned, by several of the states to help them write the rules. Nobody knew what you ought to do. I remember having a young man from West Texas that was sitting in at the North Dallas meeting we had for the Texas Department of Agriculture to write up some new rules about this application. And so I was telling him we use such and such product for brush control on rights of way. He'd never seen anything but a mesquite about every 100 yards, you know, and he'd never been out of West Texas. And so, not that there's anything wrong against South or West Texas, I love it, but I couldn't believe this boy was working in that position. And he said, well, why would you want to kill those trees? We just love trees where I come from. And I said, well, how do you like black nights? It keeps the electricity going, and it keeps the power lines from being interrupted. They had to clear those trees back to build the power line, to have the right of way. Now we have to spray it to maintain it. But that was, honestly, that was the mentality of agricultural employees in those days, too. And anyway, I'll tell you one about in Arkansas when the licensing and rules first started. I helped them write those rules too. But the state, and if some of you were there, raise your hand. But the state, when they first licensed all people who applied pesticides, they rented a dinner theater in Hot Springs. And it was a great big place with the seats all around all 4 sides and a stage out in the middle for show productions. And so they set this table up out in the middle and had all the applicators lined up out there, going to give them their first test so that they could, you know, be licensed. Well, there was one question on the test that was kind of done to keep the place lively, and so you could always tell when applicants got to that question, because the question was a A, B, C, D, you know, pick one answer, and it was, if you're driving a truckload of herbicides, unlabeled, and you're stopped by the state police, you should A, call the nearest EPA office, B, call the State Department of Agriculture, C, can't remember that one, and D was take 2 drinks and burn the truck. So when all these guys, and most of them were crop dusters, you know, and when they got to that point, you'd know who was answering what, but they all laughed, like you did. But anyway, that was kind of the way it all started. And so I could go on and on and on, and like I say, I could tell a million stories, and I'm not exaggerating any of them, but I remember I was doing some work for a power company in East Texas, and I got a call from the power company that said,